The night was still, painted in the soft amber glow of distant streetlights that barely touched the long stretch of asphalt. The hum of the cruiser's engine was the only sound cutting through the silence as Officer Daniel Myers cruised along Highway 47, a route known more for its emptiness than for any real action. It was one of those nights where the minutes seemed to crawl, where even the radio chatter felt drowsy. He had been on the road for nearly 6 hours, the rhythmic sound of tires on pavement almost hypnotic, when a small blue sedan caught his attention. At first, it wasn't doing anything wrong. The car wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, and its brake lights worked perfectly fine. Yet something about it didn't sit right with him. The way it hugged the edge of the lane, the occasional dip of the hood as if the driver were distracted, the dim glow of a single taillight that flickered in and out. 1,000 little details that didn't amount to much on paper but screamed for a closer look in the mind of a seasoned officer. He adjusted his mirror, following the vehicle from a careful distance. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was instinct. In his line of work, instincts were what often stood between routine and regret. The radio crackled softly as dispatch checked in. He responded mechanically, his eyes fixed on the sedan. "Unit 5, copy that," he said. His thumb hovered over the light switch for a long moment. He hesitated. Pulling someone over without cause wasn't something he did lightly. But there it was again, that faint, almost imperceptible drift across the center line, just enough to make his decision. The cruiser's red and blue lights burst to life, washing the empty highway in a swirl of color. The sedan hesitated, then slowly eased to the shoulder. Dust and gravel spat up beneath its tires. Officer Myers took a deep breath, his mind already cycling through the standard routine. Approach from the left, maintain visibility, assess the driver's demeanor. But as he stepped out, the cool night air hit him differently this time. There was an odd heaviness to it, an almost invisible tension that he couldn't name. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached the driver's side window. The car's exhaust whispered into the night, steady but faint, as though the vehicle itself was holding its breath. When the window rolled down, the driver, a man in his late 20s, clean-cut, hands visibly trembling, looked up at him. The man's eyes carried something unusual, something beyond simple anxiety. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice strained but polite. "Evening," Myers replied evenly. "Everything all right tonight, sir?" "Yes, sir, just heading home." There was a long pause. Myers' flashlight beam flicked across the dashboard, registration papers, an air freshener shaped like a pine tree, and then, for a split second, the face of the passenger. A woman, pale, silent, eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't even glance at him. He couldn't help but feel that something was deeply off. The way she sat so rigidly, the way the driver's hand twitched near the gear shift every time he moved, it didn't feel like a normal traffic stop anymore. But still, protocol demanded composure. He returned his gaze to the driver. "Mind telling me where you're coming from?" he asked. The man hesitated, not long enough to be a red flag, but long enough to make the silence heavy. "Just from my sister's place," he said finally. "Up north. We had dinner." "Your sister?" Myers echoed quietly, his eyes flicking once more to the woman. Something in her expression, or rather, the absence of one, seemed to tighten his chest. The highway remained empty, the world beyond the flashing lights forgotten. In that moment it was just the three of them, the officer, the nervous driver, and the silent passenger, whose stillness seemed to carry a story all its own. And yet, despite the unease, despite the prickle running down the back of his neck, Myers couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would stay with him for a long time to come. 2. An officer's instinct. A driver's confusion. The first thing Myers noticed was how the driver avoided eye contact, not in a defiant way, not with guilt or arrogance, but more like a man who desperately didn't want to draw attention to something. His hand stayed visible on the wheel, his breathing uneven. Myers had seen fear before, the kind that came from guilt, and the kind that came from something else entirely. This felt like the latter. "License and registration, please," Myers said in a steady voice. The driver nodded quickly, fumbling through the glove compartment. His movements were jerky, anxious. Papers fluttered onto the floor. He muttered an apology, retrieving the documents with shaking fingers. "Sorry, officer. It's been a long night." "Take your time," Myers said, watching him closely. The tone wasn't accusatory, but his eyes didn't waver. He was studying the man, reading every nervous twitch and broken breath, like a detective piecing together a confession that hadn't yet been spoken. The driver finally handed over the license. "David Hale," Myers read aloud. "Local resident, address checked out, nothing unusual." He gave a small nod, keeping his expression neutral. But something in his gut refused to settle. His flashlight drifted back to the passenger. She still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't blinked for what felt like too long. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked tightly, as though she were holding herself together. "Man, are you okay?" Myers asked gently, leaning slightly forward to catch her gaze. The woman's eyes flicked toward him only for a fraction of a second. They were glassy, wide, and filled with a kind of silent plea that made his heart skip. She didn't answer, just gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. That nod said everything and nothing at once. "Sir," Myers said, turning his attention back to the driver. "You said you were coming from your sister's place. Is she nearby?" "Yes," David replied too quickly. "Just a few towns over." Myers tilted his head. "And your passenger?" Another pause. This one longer. She's a friend," David said finally. "She's not feeling well. I'm taking her home." The explanation fit on the surface, but there was something about the way he said it. The slight tremor, the glance toward the rearview mirror, the tightening of his jaw, that made Myers' instincts flare again. Over the years he had learned to trust those instincts. They were often the only thing standing between understanding and tragedy. His flashlight caught a detail he hadn't noticed before. A faint mark on the woman's wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her sweater. It could have been anything, a bruise, a shadow, a trick of the light, but it made him uneasy. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle for a moment, sir?" Myers said softly, though his tone carried quiet authority. David froze. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I just want to make sure everyone's all right," Myers replied evenly. "That's all." A long silence followed. The hum of the cruiser lights painted their faces in alternating shades of red and blue. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and pine. Finally, David exhaled, his voice barely audible. "Please, officer, she's sick. We just need to get to the hospital. That's all." The word hospital hit differently. Myers' gaze softened slightly, the edges of suspicion blending with concern. Maybe this wasn't about crime at all. Maybe it was something far more human. Still, he couldn't ignore the unease crawling beneath his skin. Years of experience had taught him that even truth could wear a disguise. He studied the woman again, her posture, her eyes, the faint tremble in her shoulders. In that instant, the script of a simple traffic stop had vanished. This wasn't routine anymore. It was something else entirely, something fragile, urgent, and painfully real, hovering just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The seconds stretched between them, thin and heavy like a thread about to snap. Officer Myers stood there, flashlight in hand, his pulse steady but his thoughts restless. The passenger hadn't spoken a single word since the moment he approached the car. She sat motionless, her silhouette barely visible in the glow from the dashboard lights. Every now and then the reflection from his flashlight caught the faint glimmer of her eyes, unblinking, fixed straight ahead as though her mind was somewhere far away. He'd seen silence before. Silence that screamed guilt, silence that pleaded for help, and silence that meant fear so deep it froze the tongue. This one was something different. It wasn't the silence of resistance or secrecy. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, a silence born of exhaustion, confusion, or perhaps something she couldn't yet put into words. "Ma'am," Myers said again, his tone softer now, "are you Feeling all right?" The woman shifted slightly, her fingers twitching in her lap. The move was small, hesitant, uncertain, but it was the first sign of life he'd seen from her. She didn't look at him this time, didn't even seem to register the question. The air between them thickened. David, the driver, spoke quickly before she could respond. "He's fine, officer. She's just tired. It's been a long day, like I said." Myers turned his gaze back to him, eyebrows narrowing slightly. The driver's voice was taut, strained under the surface. He was trying to keep control of the situation, but there was something in his tone, something rehearsed, maybe even protective. "Tired?" Myers repeated quietly. "All right. Does she have any medical conditions I should know about?" "No. She's just exhausted. We've been on the road for hours." The answer came too fast again, almost overlapping Myers' question. The officer took a slow breath, studying the man's face. He could see the perspiration glistening on David's temple, the way his chest rose and fell faster than it should. Every instinct told him this wasn't a normal situation. He angled his flashlight downward, carefully, respectfully, to get a better look at the passenger. She wore a pale cardigan and jeans. Her hair was loose, slightly tangled, as though she'd been resting against the car seat for too long. Her right hand clutched something small, a corner of fabric, maybe the edge of a scarf, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Man," Myers tried again, a gentler edge in his voice now, "can you tell me your name?" Her lips parted slightly. For a moment he thought she might answer. Instead, a weak, breathless sound escaped. Not a word, but a soft exhale that carried something like pain. Then she closed her mouth again. The driver turned sharply, his eyes flashing toward her. "It's okay," he whispered, too quietly for Myers to miss. His hand reached out, resting lightly on her knee. A gesture meant to calm her, but it looked more like an attempt to keep her still. Myers noticed everything. The way her shoulders tensed at his touch, the way her eyes flickered with a glimmer of something that could have been fear. He stepped back slightly, the tension between observation and intervention rising in his chest. "Sir," he said evenly, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." David's grip tightened on the wheel. "I already told you, officer, she's not well. Please, we just need to get to the hospital." "I understand," Myers said calmly, "but I need to make sure she's safe. Step out for me." A long, silent standoff followed. The hum of the idling engine filled the night air, and somewhere in the distance a lone truck roared by, its headlights sweeping across the scene before disappearing into the darkness. The woman still hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow now, uneven. Myers could see the faint tremor in her hands, could hear the unspoken message in the way she refused to speak. Finally, David sighed heavily, shoulders slumping. "Okay," he said under his breath. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out into the cool night air. Myers motioned him toward the back of the car. "Stay right there, sir." He watched carefully as the man complied, jaw tight, eyes flicking nervously toward the passenger seat. Then Myers leaned slightly, lowering himself to the woman's level again. "You're safe," he said softly. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just nod if you can hear me." Her eyes lifted, finally meeting his. In that fleeting second, something shifted, a fragile spark of connection between silence and understanding. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't. The weight of that unsaid truth lingered in the air. Behind them, David called out, "Officer, please, she just needs rest. I told you she's sick." But Myers didn't answer him. His instincts were humming now, every nerve alive with the sense that he was standing on the edge of something deeper. The woman's eyes darted toward the dashboard, then back at him. She gave the smallest shake of her head, almost imperceptible. A warning or a plea, he couldn't tell. In that instant, the silence she had carried became louder than any scream. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was communication, hidden between glances and gestures. She was trying to tell him something she wasn't allowed to say aloud. Or, from frustration to concern. As the moments dragged on, the atmosphere changed. The initial sharpness of the encounter began to dull, giving way to a different kind of tension, one steeped in uncertainty. Myers' training told him to stay alert, to follow procedure, to assert authority. But his humanity whispered something else. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't about broken laws or reckless driving. It was about fear. He turned to face David, who was standing by the trunk, arms folded tightly across his chest. "I need you to be straight with me," Myers said firmly. "Is she hurt?" David shook his head quickly. "No, she's been through a lot. I'm trying to help her, okay?" "Help her how?" A pause. "Is not well mentally. Anxiety, panic, caution and fear." David's eyes flicked toward the car, then down to the ground. "She's not well mentally. Angry, victimless," he said. David's eyes flicked toward the car, then down at the... It sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable. Myers had dealt with anxious passengers before, people who froze up, who avoided contact, who just wanted the stop to end. But there was a brittleness to David's explanation that didn't sit right. "All right," Myers said slowly, "but if she's unwell, she needs medical attention, not a long drive in the middle of the night." Michael Houchin. "We're on our way," David replied quickly. "There's a clinic 2 towns over. I didn't think we'd get pulled over. I didn't want to make her panic more." The words were smooth, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Myers could feel his frustration building. Not the kind born of arrogance or authority, but the kind that comes when truth feels just out of reach. He wanted to believe the man. He really did. But the woman's silence, her stillness, her barely contained fear, it all pointed elsewhere. He glanced toward the car again. The woman was staring at them now through the windshield. Her face was pale under the dashboard glow. The moment she realized Myers was looking back, her lips moved ever so slightly, not forming a word but shaping something invisible. He couldn't read it, but he could feel it. It was desperate. The night wind shifted, carrying the faintest scent of rain. Myers rubbed the back of his neck, torn between frustration and worry. The procedural part of his mind ticked through the next steps: detain the driver, call for backup, check the vehicle. But the other part, the human part, hesitated. If the woman really was in distress, any sudden move might push her further into panic. "Sir," he said again, calmer now, "I'm not here to make this harder. But I need to make sure she's safe. That's my job. If she's ill, she should be able to confirm that herself. Let me talk to her." David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "She won't talk to you. Please, officer, she's scared. She doesn't trust anyone right now." Myers took a slow breath. Sometimes people are scared for good reason. That made David freeze. His expression faltered, a tiny crack in the armor of calm he had tried to maintain. Myers noticed it. He always noticed. It wasn't just what people said, it was how their bodies betrayed them. The nervous swallow, the avoidance of direct eye contact, the split-second pause before a denial. Every detail told a story. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If she's in danger, now's the time to tell me." David's lips parted as though to respond, but no words came out. His gaze shifted again to the passenger seat, then away. Inside the car, the woman's hand moved, slow and trembling. She pressed her palm against the window. Not enough to make noise, just enough to leave a faint print against the glass. Myers' eyes caught it immediately. It was subtle, fleeting, but it made his stomach tighten. The frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface began to twist into something else. Concern, sharp and urgent. He had no proof yet, nothing concrete, but every fiber of his being was screaming that this wasn't a misunderstanding. He stepped toward the car again, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. His flashlight beam swept across the passenger's lap, catching a glimpse of something metallic near her side. Maybe a seatbelt buckle, maybe something else. Her fingers closed around it instinctively, almost protectively. Myers hesitated only a second before speaking again, his voice steady but softer now. "You don't have to be afraid," he said to her. "You're not in trouble. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her eyes lifted again, glistening in the flashing light, and for the first time since the stop began, she blinked. Once, slowly, as if that small gesture carried the weight of everything she couldn't say aloud. Behind him, David's voice cracked. "Please, officer, we just need to go." But Myers didn't turn around this time. His frustration had transformed completely into concern. His instincts no longer whispering but shouting that the truth of that car went far beyond a broken tail light or a missed signal in the dark. The night had grown heavier, the air thick with the kind of silence that made even the sound of breathing feel loud. Officer Myers stood near the passenger window, his flashlight angled downward, the beam slicing across the interior of the car. Every detail seemed amplified. The hum of the engine, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt, the faint tremor in the woman's hands. Something in his gut told him that one wrong move, one misplaced word, could shatter whatever fragile truth was hanging between them. He took a cautious step closer, eyes scanning again, not for weapons or contraband, but for context. He had learned long ago that sometimes the smallest detail, a look, a photograph, a gesture, could shift an entire story. And then he saw it. Tucked just beneath the corner of the dashboard, half covered by a worn tissue, was a photograph. It wasn't positioned neatly or intentionally. It looked like something hastily shoved aside. Myers adjusted the angle of his flashlight, the image coming into focus. It was a picture of a smiling woman, the same woman sitting in the passenger seat, standing beside an older man and a little boy. Their faces were lit with joy, the kind that belonged to better days. The photo was creased, smudged, and slightly torn at the edges, but something about it struck him immediately. The background wasn't ordinary. It looked like a hospital room. Myers' pulse quickened, his eyes flicking from the photograph to the woman. Her breathing had quickened almost imperceptibly when she noticed where his gaze had landed. She looked like she wanted to reach for it, but didn't dare. The driver, David, shifted uncomfortably, his voice tight. "That's nothing, officer. Just an old picture. She keeps it there for comfort." "For comfort," Myers echoed softly. "Looks like it means a lot to her." David didn't answer. He was gripping the steering wheel again, though the car wasn't even in gear. His knuckles were pale against the leather. Myers leaned closer, gently tapping the photo with his flashlight. "Mind if I take a closer look?" "He doesn't like people touching her things," David said sharply, almost too sharply. "It's personal." "I understand," Myers replied, his tone calm but firm. "Still, something about this doesn't add up." He crouched slightly, angling his light once more toward the passenger. Her gaze had fallen to her lap, her lips parted, and for the first time a faint whisper escaped her. It was so soft he barely caught it. Just one word, trembling on the edge of breath. "It was—" "Please." That single word hit him harder than any confession. It wasn't a plea for him to leave. It was something else, a call for understanding, for recognition. Myers' instincts surged like an alarm bell in his chest. He took a step back, letting his hand rest near his radio. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you trying to tell me something? Do you need help?" Her head moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. A half nod, half flinch. David's voice cut in before Myers could continue. "Officer, she's not well. She says things she doesn't mean. Please, stop upsetting her." But the more he tried to talk, the more obvious it became that his words were driven by fear, not frustration. Myers had seen defensive behavior before, and this wasn't the kind that came from guilt over speeding or a broken light. This was something deeper. His gaze fell again on the photograph, the hospital room in the background. That wasn't a waiting area, he realized. It was an ICU ward, the kind where patients were under intensive observation. There were wires, machines, and in the corner of the photo a small tag clipped to a bed railing. He couldn't make out the name, but the shape was unmistakable. "Ma'am," he said again, lowering his voice to almost a whisper, "is that photo from a hospital?" Her eyes flicked toward him, then toward the driver, then back again. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to respond, but David's hand landed on her arm, firm enough that Myers saw the tension ripple through her shoulders. "Sir," Myers said sharply, straightening, "step away from her arm." David froze. "I wasn't—" "I said step away." His voice carried a weight that left no room for negotiation. David's hand retreated slowly, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. The rain had begun to fall now, tapping softly against the car roof, as though the night itself was listening in. Myers took another slow breath, his heart pounding. That photograph wasn't just an image. It was a clue, a window into something this man didn't want seen. He didn't know the full story yet, but he could feel it building, the unseen truth sitting just beneath the surface, ready to break free at any moment. The woman finally turned her head toward him fully. Her eyes glistened, catching the faint red and blue reflection from his cruiser lights, and though she didn't speak again, her expression said enough. It was a look Myers had only seen a few times in his career, the look of someone silently begging for rescue. 6. A truth hidden in plain sight. When Myers walked back to his patrol car to run the plates, he could still feel the weight of that look pressing on him. He'd seen lies before, hundreds of them, but what he saw in that woman's eyes wasn't deceit. It was desperation. The computer screen flickered to life, displaying registration information. The car was indeed registered to David Hale. Clean record, insurance valid, nothing suspicious. But then, as he scanned the system, something unexpected caught his eye. A missing person alert. Female, late 20s, last seen 2 days ago in a neighboring county. The name listed was Emily Rowe. Her description, hair color, build, height, matched the woman in the passenger seat almost exactly. Myers froze. His stomach tightened. He reread the details twice just to be sure. Emily Rowe. Reported missing by her brother after leaving the local hospital against medical advice. The note from the report: suffering from trauma following an accident, considered vulnerable. Last seen with an unidentified male. He turned his head toward the blue sedan parked under the rain, and the world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint. David wasn't her brother, and this wasn't a ride home. He walked back slowly, deliberately, each step calculated. The drizzle had turned into steady rain, droplets running down the brim of his hat. He could see David watching him through the rearview mirror. Tense, alert, like a man waiting for something to go wrong. The passenger, Emily, if the report was right, sat motionless, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. When he reached the window again, he kept his tone even. "Sir, can you step out of the car for me once more?" David hesitated. "Why?" "I just need to clarify something about your passenger." "He told you she's fine," David snapped, his voice rising. "You're overstepping." "Step out, please," Myers repeated, his patience thinning but his voice still calm. David's nostrils flared. "You got a warrant?" "I don't need one for a welfare check," Myers replied evenly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with visible reluctance, David opened the door and stepped into the rain, muttering under his breath. Myers positioned himself between the man and the car, maintaining a calm posture while his mind raced. "What's her name?" he asked. David blinked, confused. "What?" "Your passenger. What's her full name?" "She told you she's—" He stammered, caught off guard. "She's Anna. Anna Rowe." "Anna?" Myers repeated slowly. "Not Emily?" The flicker of panic in David's eyes was instant, a flash of realization that betrayed him completely. "Didn't say Emily," Myers said quietly. David's jaw clenched. The silence that followed was thick, heavier than the rain. Myers had him now. He turned slightly toward the car. Emily's face was pressed against the glass, tears mixing with the rain outside. Her lips moved again, this time forming two words that Myers could clearly read. "Help me." He moved toward her door carefully, but David took a half-step forward, panic replacing defiance. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's confused." "Myers, back up, sir," Myers warned. His voice was steady but carried the unmistakable tone of authority that came from years of experience. David didn't move. His hands lifted slightly, defensive. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect her. She wasn't safe there. They were keeping her locked up." The confession slipped out before he could stop it, and Myers knew the truth had finally cracked open. Emily's trembling form confirmed it. Her sobs were silent, but her body shook as the tension of the night spilled over. "Sir," Myers said again, his voice low but sharp. "Step back now." David's shoulders sagged under the weight of his own unraveling. He looked less like a criminal and more like a man caught in a storm of his own making, torn between what he believed was right and what was undeniably wrong. Myers moved closer to the passenger side, opening the door carefully. Emily flinched but didn't resist. Her voice, weak but real this time, broke the silence. "Please, I just want to go home." That was all it took for the last of Myers' doubts to vanish. The truth hadn't been hidden in lies or deceit. It had been right there in the open, disguised as concern, masked by good intentions gone astray. It was in the trembling of her hands, the flicker of her eyes, the way her silence had been both shield and signal. He realized then that sometimes danger didn't announce itself with aggression or violence. Sometimes it came dressed in care, in protection that crossed invisible lines, in a kind of love that had turned into control. Emily's eyes met his once more, and for the first time that night there was a glimmer of relief in them. The storm outside had turned into a steady downpour, washing away the tension like ink running from paper, and as the truth settled between them, undeniable, fragile, and human, Myers knew the story of that quiet highway would stay with him for the rest of his life. The rain had turned the world silver and quiet, each droplet drumming softly against the patrol car's hood. The cruiser lights still pulsed in slow rhythm, painting the wet asphalt in waves of red and blue. Officer Myers stood between two opposing forces, the rigid call of his duty and the human pull of empathy. The handbook told him one thing, procedure another, but his instincts whispered a softer truth. Emily sat wrapped in a thin blanket now, her shoulders trembling under its weight. The emergency medical responders were still minutes away, and in that waiting space the night seemed suspended, fragile. David stood a few feet away, handcuffed, drenched from the rain, his face hollow with defeat. He wasn't shouting anymore. The fight had gone out of him. There was just silence. Not the hostile kind, but the exhausted kind that follows a breaking point. Myers stood there, watching both of them, the weight of his badge pressing heavier than it ever had before. He had worn it for nearly 15 years, long enough to know that the law could draw sharp, unforgiving lines. But tonight, standing in the middle of a storm with two broken souls, he realized those lines sometimes blurred. When he'd first pulled that car over, he'd been certain he was dealing with something simple. A possible DUI, maybe a case of reckless driving, but what he found was something far more complex. A man trying to help someone he loved, in all the wrong ways. A woman trapped between fear and trust, between the need to escape and the guilt of caring for the person she feared. David shivered, his voice cracking through the rain. "You don't understand, officer. They were going to take her back to that hospital. She begged me not to let them. She said she didn't want to be locked away again." Myers didn't answer right away. He'd seen the kind of desperation that came when people felt cornered by the world, when systems meant to help felt like cages. But he'd also seen what happened when care became control, when protection slipped into possession. "David," he said finally, keeping his tone calm, "you can't take someone against their will, even if you think you're helping. That's not your call to make." David looked up at him, eyes red and pleading. "She did want to come, I swear she did, but then she started to panic halfway here. She said she wanted to go home, but she didn't mean it. She doesn't know what's good for her right now." Myers glanced back toward the car. Emily's head rested against the seat, eyes closed, rain still dripping from her hair. She looked utterly spent, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from travel or illness, but from being trapped too long in uncertainty. He approached her gently. "Emily," he said softly, crouching beside the open door. "You don't have to talk, if you don't want to. But I need to know, did you agree to come with him?" Her eyes opened slowly, pupils reflecting the shimmer of the patrol lights. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, I thought I did. He said we were going home." Myers nodded, listening carefully. "And did you change your mind?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I told him I didn't feel safe anymore. I wanted to go back. He said I couldn't. He said people would take me away again." Her voice broke, small and fragile, the kind that carried both confusion and guilt. Myers stood, the decision solidifying inside him like stone. He wasn't angry at David, not in the way he might have been with someone acting out of cruelty or greed. This was a different kind of wrong, one born from love, tangled with fear, care twisted by desperation. He walked back to the man slowly. "She says she changed her mind," he said quietly. "And when she said that, you didn't let her go?" David shook his head, rain streaking down his face. "You don't get it. She's sick. If she went back, they'd drug her again. They'd keep her there until she forgot who she was." "And if she's sick," Myers replied gently, "then she needs help from the right people. That's not something you can give her by taking her away." David's shoulders sagged. "I just wanted her to be free." "I know," Myers said, voice soft, "but freedom isn't taking someone's choice away." For a long time they stood there in the rain, both men silent. The flashing lights cast reflections that rippled across the wet pavement like fading echoes of conflict. Myers could see it in David's expression, the dawning realization that what he had done wasn't an act of protection, but one of fear. And still, Myers didn't feel anger. He felt something else. That deep, aching compassion that comes when a person realizes everyone involved is human, flawed, and trying to make sense of pain. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics worked quietly, checking Emily's vitals, wrapping her in a fresh blanket. Myers stayed close, watching her expression soften, her breathing steadying. When they asked if she wanted to go to the hospital, she hesitated, then nodded, but not with fear this time. There was relief in it. David watched her go, tears mixing with the rain. He didn't speak, didn't struggle, just stood there as the reality of what he'd done settled over him. Myers didn't speak either. Some moments didn't need words, they only needed understanding. He knew he'd have to write a report later, fill out forms, check boxes, but no paperwork could capture what had happened here. It wasn't about guilt or innocence, it was about the fragile balance between law and compassion, and the cost of crossing it, even with good intentions. As the paramedics closed the ambulance doors, Myers caught one last glimpse of Emily. She met his gaze through the glass and gave the faintest, trembling nod. Not of thanks, but of acknowledgement. It was enough. 8. Humanity over protocol. The road was quiet again after the ambulance pulled away, its siren fading into the distance. The storm had eased to a drizzle, and the flashing lights from the patrol car painted long streaks across the wet ground. Myers stood still, watching the rain slide down his sleeves, his mind heavy with the night's events. He'd followed the rules. Every step of procedure accounted for. He'd called it in, requested medical aid, detained the man responsible. By the book, everything had been correct, but somewhere deep down, he knew that what had mattered most tonight hadn't been written in any manual. He turned toward David, who sat quietly on the hood of the cruiser now, wrists still cuffed, head bowed. There was no anger in him anymore, just the hollow look of someone who had finally realized that love, when twisted by fear, can imprison more effectively than chains ever could. "Was she really at the hospital?" Myers asked softly. David nodded weakly. "She'd been there since the accident. Her husband and son died last year. She was the only one who survived. They said she needed treatment, but she hated it there. She said she felt like she was disappearing." His voice cracked. "She begged me to take her away. I thought I was doing the right thing." Myers exhaled slowly, feeling the ache settle in his chest. He'd seen tragedy before. Broken families, loss, the aftermath of grief. But something about this story cut deeper. Maybe it was the way David's words carried conviction. The way Emily's silence carried pain. Maybe it was because he knew that both of them were victims of something far larger than the choices they'd made. "Sometimes," Myers said quietly, "doing the right thing means letting professionals do their job, even when it hurts." David gave a broken laugh, shaking his head. "You think I didn't know that? Every mile I drove, I kept thinking maybe I should turn back, but she kept crying. She said she wanted to go home. Then, halfway there, she changed. She started begging me to stop. I didn't know what to do. Myers nodded, his voice soft. And that's when you stopped being her protector and became her captor. Not because you wanted to hurt her, but because you couldn't face losing her again. David didn't respond. His shoulders trembled. Whether from cold or regret, Myers couldn't tell. A faint rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. The storm was passing, but its memory lingered in the air. Myers radioed dispatch with the update, his tone steady and professional, yet beneath the routine phrasing, "One in custody, one transported for evaluation," his heart wasn't in it. This wasn't victory, it wasn't closure. It was a quiet reckoning. As he stood beside the cruiser, watching the last streaks of lightning fade, Myers thought of how many times he'd been taught that the badge represented order, control, justice. But in moments like this, it felt less like a symbol of power and more like a reminder of balance. The fragile line between enforcing the law and understanding the lives caught in its path. He turned back to David, who was staring at the ground. "You'll have your chance to explain what happened," he said gently. "They'll see you meant no harm." David nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Doesn't change what I did." "No," Myers agreed, "but it matters that you understand it." The rain stopped completely then, leaving behind the soft scent of wet earth and pine. The world felt strangely calm, as if even the night was exhaling. Myers looked out at the dark stretch of highway, remembering how it had all started. A flicker of light, a car that didn't quite fit the rhythm of the road. What had seemed like a random stop had unfolded into something infinitely more human, a story of grief, fear, and unintended harm. In the stillness, Myers felt a quiet truth settle over him, that compassion wasn't weakness, and following protocol without empathy wasn't strength. Real justice, he realized, was found somewhere in between, in the willingness to see people not as cases or suspects, but as souls, wrestling with their own storms. The night had taken him through anger, confusion, and fear. Now, as dawn's first faint glow began to touch the horizon, all he felt was a deep, aching empathy for everyone involved, for Emily, for David, and for himself. Because, in the end, being human meant carrying both the weight of the law and the mercy to look beyond it. The first light of morning broke through the thinning clouds as the ambulance disappeared down the road. Officer Myers stood in silence, his uniform soaked, watching as the world slowly exhaled after the storm. David sat in the back of the cruiser, tears streaming freely now, no longer restrained by pride or anger. Emily's face, seen last through the rain-streaked window, lingered in his mind. Her faint smile, fragile but real. The weight of truth had finally settled, not with shouting or violence, but with the quiet release of everything unspoken, everything held too tightly for too long. The highway, once tense with uncertainty, now felt like a place of release, a space where sorrow and grace met in fragile balance. Myers felt it too, that strange ache of compassion that came when justice and mercy found each other. As dawn stretched across the wet asphalt, the night's story became something more than a report or a call. It was a reminder of how easily pain hides behind ordinary faces, how love can blur into fear, and how silence can hold deeper cries than words ever could. Myers knew he would remember this. Not for the arrest, not for the paperwork, but for the moment when a simple stop turned into a glimpse of humanity's raw truth. Every light, every shadow on that road had told the same story, that what we see rarely tells the whole of what is being lived beneath the surface. As the echoes of this story fade, remember, every road holds a secret, every stranger carries a truth, and sometimes the smallest encounter can change everything. If this story reached you, if it stirred something deep inside, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and join the growing circle of listeners who believe that stories can heal, awaken, and unite us. Like this video if it reminded you of the power of empathy, how a single act of compassion can shift an entire world. Share your thoughts below. What moment in this story touched you most? Have you ever witnessed kindness appear in the unlikeliest place? Your words might just inspire the next story we tell. And don't forget to share this video, because the right story at the right time can change someone's day or even their life. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment from the A1 Storyteller Channel, where every tale uncovers the hidden humanity behind ordinary moments. Until the next story unfolds, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the truth finds you when you least expect it.